A family moved into their dream home, flipped on the switch in their brand new kitchen, and within 6 months, the wall behind that switch was scorched black inside, hidden completely from view, because of a mistake made during a single afternoon of wiring work. Nobody saw it happen. Nobody heard a warning. The lights simply worked, day after day, until they didn't. If you've ever wondered what's really happening behind your walls every time you flip a switch, stick around, because every week we dig into the construction mistakes hiding inside American homes, the ones inspectors miss and homeowners never think to check, and we break them down so you know exactly what to look for before they cost you thousands. It starts almost always the same way. A builder is racing against a deadline. A homeowner wants their new recessed lighting installed by Friday. An electrician is juggling 3 job sites in 1 week, and somewhere in that rush, a decision gets made that looks completely fine on the surface. The lights go in, they turn on. Everyone moves on to the next task. But lighting is one of the most deceptive parts of home construction, because a mistake here doesn't usually show up on day one. It shows up months, sometimes years later, and by then, the damage is already done. Picture a beautiful, open-concept living room, the kind you'd see in a home magazine, with a dozen recessed lights dotting the ceiling in a perfect grid. It looks expensive. It looks intentional. But behind that drywall, an entirely different story is unfolding. The insulation above those lights has been pushed aside, or worse, packed tightly against fixtures that were never rated to touch it. Most homeowners never notice this because the ceiling looks flawless from below. The real problem is invisible, sitting just a few inches above their heads, quietly building heat every single time the lights are switched on. Here's the part almost nobody outside the trade understands. Recessed lights generate heat, sometimes a surprising amount of it, especially with older-style bulbs or cheap fixtures. Professional-grade fixtures are built with airflow in mind, designed to let that heat escape safely. But cheaper fixtures, or fixtures installed without proper clearance, trap that heat against wood framing and insulation. Wood doesn't need an open flame to become a fire risk. Given enough sustained heat over a long enough time, it can reach a point where it begins to smolder from the inside, long before anyone ever sees smoke. This is where the story usually splits into 2 very different paths. In one version, a licensed electrician installs fixtures rated for insulation contact, leaves proper clearance, and the ceiling stays safe for decades without anyone thinking twice about it. In the other version, someone tries to save time or money, insulation gets packed in tight, and a slow, silent countdown begins that nobody in the house is even aware of. But the biggest mistake hadn't even happened yet, because heat alone isn't usually what causes the real disaster. It's what happens when that heat meets moisture. And in lighting installation, moisture problems are shockingly common, especially in bathrooms, kitchens, and anywhere near an exterior wall. Think about a bathroom ceiling fan and light combo, the kind found in nearly every American home. It looks simple enough. Flip the switch, the fan hums, moisture clears out after a shower. But behind that fixture, there's supposed to be a duct, a pathway that carries all that warm, wet air outside the home, away from the wood framing and insulation. In far too many houses, that duct either doesn't exist, was never properly connected, or dead ends inside the attic instead of venting outdoors. What happens next surprised even experienced home inspectors the first time they saw it clearly. Every single time someone showers, all that moisture gets pumped directly into the attic space instead of leaving the house. Over months and years, that moisture soaks into insulation, condenses on the underside of the roof, and creates the perfect environment for mold to grow in complete darkness. completely unnoticed. Homeowners usually discover this the hard way, when they finally go up into the attic to fix something unrelated and find dark staining across the plywood, or when a musty smell starts drifting down through the ceiling vents. By that point, the damage isn't just cosmetic. Wet insulation loses its ability to keep a home warm or cool efficiently, which means higher energy bills every single month. Wet wood framing weakens over time, and mold, once established in a space that dark and damp, can spread far beyond where it started, creating a much bigger and more expensive problem than a simple duct connection would have ever cost to install correctly in the first place. At first, it doesn't seem like a serious problem. A little discoloration, a faint smell that comes and goes. But this hidden detail changes everything, because once mold takes hold behind a ceiling, removing it often means tearing out drywall, replacing insulation, and sometimes even addressing structural wood that's been compromised. What could have been a 15-minute fix during construction, simply connecting a vent duct to the outside instead of leaving it disconnected, turns into a repair bill that can run into the thousands, along with weeks of disruption to a family's daily life. Now here's where the story takes another turn, because lighting mistakes aren't only about heat and moisture. Sometimes the danger is far more direct and far more electrical in nature. Imagine a homeowner deciding to add a beautiful chandelier above their dining room table, replacing a plain old light fixture that came with the house. It seems like a simple upgrade. Turn off the breaker, disconnect the old fixture, connect the new one, done. But there's a critical detail that trips up even people who consider themselves handy around the house. Older homes were often wired for lightweight fixtures using thin gauge wire and modest electrical boxes. A heavy chandelier, especially one loaded with crystal or metal detailing, needs a properly rated electrical box designed to support that weight, secured directly into a ceiling joist or braced correctly between them. Skip that step, and you're left with a beautiful, expensive fixture hanging from nothing more than drywall and a few screws that were never meant to bear that kind of load. This hidden detail changes everything about how the story unfolds from here. In homes where this mistake happens, the fixture might hold for a while. Weeks, months, sometimes even years, especially if nobody bumps it or if the drywall happens to be unusually solid in that one spot. But drywall wasn't designed to support hanging weight indefinitely, and vibration from everyday life, footsteps upstairs, a door slamming, even the natural settling of a house, slowly works against those screws. There was one critical mistake almost nobody noticed until it was far too late. And that's the moment a heavy fixture finally gives way and comes crashing down, sometimes onto an empty table, and sometimes onto family members gathered for dinner. Professional electricians know this risk well, which is why proper installation always starts with identifying ceiling joists or installing a rated fan and fixture brace designed specifically to hold significant weight safely. It takes a little more time. It requires opening up a small section of ceiling in some cases, but it transforms a potential disaster into a fixture that will safely hold for the life of the home. Now comes the part that costs homeowners the most money, and it has nothing to do with chandeliers or bathroom fans. It has to do with something far more common and far more overlooked: outdoor lighting. Walk around almost any American neighborhood at dusk and you'll see them. Those charming little landscape lights lining walkways, illuminating flower beds, highlighting the architecture of beautiful homes. They create an inviting, magazine-worthy glow. But underneath that glow, in far too many installations, lies a mistake that's remarkably common and remarkably dangerous. Wiring that was never buried deep enough, or wiring connections that were never properly sealed against moisture. Here's what most homeowners never think about. Outdoor electrical connections face a brutal environment. Rain, snow, freezing temperatures, blazing summer heat, sprinkler systems spraying water directly onto buried cables day after day. A connection that isn't sealed with a proper waterproof method will eventually let moisture creep inside, and when that happens, corrosion begins. At first, it doesn't seem like a serious problem. Maybe a light flickers occasionally, or one fixture along the path stops working while the others stay fine. Most homeowners assume it's just a bulb that needs replacing, but this is where the story reveals its most costly twist. Corrosion inside an electrical connection doesn't just cause a light to flicker, it creates resistance, and resistance creates heat, even in a low-voltage system. Combine that heat with moisture, and you've created conditions for a slow-building electrical fault, sometimes even one capable of starting a fire in the mulch or landscaping material surrounding the fixture, especially during dry summer months, when that same landscaping becomes dangerously flammable. Professional landscape lighting installation uses direct burial-rated cable, buried at an appropriate depth to avoid damage from digging or freezing, with every single connection sealed using waterproof, gel-filled connectors specifically designed to keep water out permanently, not just on installation day, but for years into the future. It's a small difference in materials and technique, but it's the difference between landscape lighting that quietly and safely enhances a home for decades, and landscape lighting that becomes an expensive, hidden liability buried just a few inches beneath the soil. What happened next, in homes where this mistake goes unnoticed and unaddressed, is usually a slow decline. More and more lights along the path stop working. Homeowners often assume the entire system is simply failing due to age and consider ripping it all out and starting over, spending money on an entirely new system, when the real problem was never the fixtures at all. It was a handful of poorly sealed connections buried in the yard. Let's step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture forming here, because these mistakes, the recessed lighting trapped against insulation, the disconnected bathroom fan venting straight into the attic, the chandelier hanging from unsupported drywall, the landscape lighting corroding underground. They all share something important in common. None of them are visible from a normal walkthrough of a finished home. None of them show up in a quick visual inspection. They're all hidden behind, above, or beneath finished surfaces, which is exactly why they're able to cause so much damage before anyone notices anything is wrong. This is precisely why professional home inspectors are trained to look far beyond the obvious. Experienced inspectors don't just flip switches to confirm lights turn on. They check attic spaces for signs of moisture staining near bathroom exhaust vents. They examine recessed lighting fixtures to confirm proper insulation clearance ratings. They gently test the stability of heavier ceiling fixtures. They look for outdoor electrical connections that appear improperly sealed or buried too shallow. It's slower work than simply flipping switches and checking boxes, but it's the difference between catching a problem while it's still a $15 fix and discovering it after it's become a $15,000 disaster. For homeowners and buyers who aren't inspectors themselves, there are still meaningful ways to protect against these hidden dangers. Before buying a home or before finishing any lighting project, it's worth asking direct questions about what type of fixtures were installed and whether they're rated for the specific application: insulation contact for recessed lighting, wet or damp location ratings for bathroom and outdoor fixtures, weight ratings for anything hanging from a ceiling. It's worth actually looking inside the attic, even briefly, checking for staining, discoloration, or a musty smell near bathroom locations. It's worth gently testing whether a chandelier or ceiling fan feels secure, or whether it has any noticeable wobble when touched. And for outdoor lighting, it's worth asking whether direct burial cable and properly sealed connections were used, rather than assuming every landscape lighting system was installed the same, safe way. None of these checks require an engineering degree. They simply require knowing where problems tend to hide, and knowing to look there before they become impossible to ignore. What makes lighting mistakes especially costly, compared to many other construction errors, is how deceptively simple the fixes usually are when caught early. Proper insulation clearance around recessed lighting is often just a matter of using the right fixture from the start, one specifically rated for insulation contact. Bathroom fan venting simply needs a continuous, properly connected duct running to the outside, not dead-ending inside an attic space. Heavy fixtures need proper structural support identified before installation, not assumed afterward. Outdoor connections need proper waterproof sealing methods used consistently, not skipped to save a few minutes on a hot afternoon. Every single one of these solutions cost relatively little at the time of construction. A slightly more expensive fixture, a few extra feet of ducting, an extra 15 minutes locating a ceiling joist, a proper waterproof connector instead of simple electrical tape. But skip any one of these steps, and the eventual cost of discovering and repairing the resulting damage can be 10, 20, sometimes even 50 times higher than doing it correctly from the very beginning. This is the pattern that repeats across almost every hidden construction disaster, not just in lighting, but throughout home building in general. The corners that get cut are rarely visible on the surface. They're chosen precisely because nobody will notice right away, because the homeowner won't know to check, because the inspector might not have time to look closely enough, because the problem won't reveal itself until well after the crew has moved on to their next project entirely. It's not usually about malicious intent. Most of these mistakes come from rushed schedules, inexperience, or simply not understanding the long-term consequences of a shortcut that looks harmless in the moment. But understanding these patterns changes everything for anyone paying attention. Once you know that recessed lighting needs proper insulation clearance, you'll never look at a ceiling full of can lights the same way again. Once you know that bathroom fans need to vent all the way outside, you'll find yourself instinctively checking for that telltale exterior vent cap on the roof or wall. Once you know how much weight drywall alone can't support, you'll think twice before hanging anything heavy without confirming what's really behind that ceiling. And once you know how vulnerable buried electrical connections are to moisture over time, you'll understand why proper landscape lighting installation matters far more than it might seem on a beautiful summer evening when everything is glowing exactly the way it should. That's really the story behind every hidden construction mistake. It's never really about the lights themselves. It's about the quiet decisions made behind the scenes, the ones nobody sees, the ones that either protect a home for decades or slowly set the stage for problems that seem to appear out of nowhere. A house that looks perfect on the surface can still be hiding serious issues just a few inches behind the walls, and the only real defense against that is knowing exactly what to look for, and knowing to look before the damage becomes impossible to undo. So the next time you walk into a beautifully lit room or admire a glowing pathway leading up to a front door at night, remember that the difference between a home that stays safe for generations and one that develops expensive, hidden problems often comes down to details you'll never actually see, made by people you'll never actually meet, during a single afternoon of work that either followed the right process or quietly skipped it. If this kind of investigation into what's really happening behind the walls of American homes is something you find valuable, come back next week, because there's always another hidden mistake waiting to be uncovered, and knowing about it before it finds you is the best protection any homeowner can have.